Cyber warfare. 2021 was the year where we covered a lot of cool little stories about this stuff. The biggest cyber warfare events ever happened last year. People got hacked, journalists got their phone completely compromised, and even in the realm of gaming, Minecraft was not safe from one of the biggest vulnerabilities we ever covered, Log4j. Now, virus investigations are a big pillar of my channel, and it's something I like to cover, especially when it comes to computer security. I think it's very important. Computer security is not a set it and forget it, okay? I hate it when people are like, I've got an antivirus running, I'm safe forever. Now I can download all the shady crap off the internet because this piece of software will keep me safe. No, computer security involves keeping ahead of every single step. Hey, you want to be in the internet connected generation? I do too. That's where I live. But right now, data is more valuable than you. The data you produce is more valuable than you. And when people can harvest a bunch of user data and use it for nefarious purposes, the endless for debauchery and making money on the internet is limitless, okay? It's a world we unfortunately have to contend and live with. The more connected we are online, the more dangerous and the more savvy we have to become in order to protect ourselves from the very same thing that gives us so much convenience and joy. Now, to understand, Kronos is the number one target that we have to talk about today. Now, if you ever worked in any big company or a hospital or anything, you probably know that I have to punch in my ID, I have to put in a little time card, I have to log the hours I spend working for someone else. Imagine working at a big giant warehouse with hundreds of people. All right, and every day you walk in, you are just a number in the machine. Imagine you're number 69. You go in, you say user 69 has logged in at 8 a.m. User 69 has worked like a dog until 5 p.m. All right, so now those hours are cataloged. User 69 may have done a few extra hours of overtime. So now you got to log those separate overtime hours separately so you get paid a little differently. The computer logs this at the end of the month, all right, at the end of the pay cycle, they look through all those hours and a check is then generated for you. Now imagine that same system gets hit with ransomware. Now all of a sudden, you're slaving like a dog at the warehouse, and at the end of the month, the people who are responsible for paying you are like, I don't know, we can't really check the hours. Now, to understand, Kronos is a target in this situation, but not just Kronos specifically, more so their private cloud service, where people can operate in the power of a giant server they host. As far as I know, people who buy services from Krono and host them locally on their own servers or their own instances aren't necessarily affected. This is purely at Kronos' right there, through their private cloud. Now, of course, if you look at what they do, they make award-winning products built for innovation. I always love these corporate sites. It's just like, hey, these are the guys who gave us awards. This is where we're covered. And innovation. Woo! Look at all these stock images. Christ. Look at how much they say. We help engage over 40 million employees daily, and all of them are most of them should be currently affected, depending on how many people use the cloud. But if you look at this carefully generated graphic, you can see what they're trying to do. They're trying to build scheduling systems and payroll, and a lot of the stuff that people in the workplace just generally want to have as automated as they can. Not just to make things easier, but to have backups and, history just saved around. We don't use Kronos, but we use software like this to make sure that everyone is paid on time and logged on time and everything, so to speak. But Kronos is one of the biggest people in the business. Now, if you look at their update real quick, let's go check through some of this. On December 11, 2021, we became aware of unauthorized activity impacting UKG Solutions using Kronos' private cloud. We took immediate action to investigate and mitigate the issue and determined that it was a ransomware incident affecting the private cloud. The environment with some of our workforce central, telestaff, healthcare extension, and banking schedule solutions are deployed. Yeah, pretty massive sectors, health and banking, let me tell you. If those two things get crippled, even just by payroll, it can be pretty disastrous. Now, as of January 7th, 2022, dear Kronos private cloud customers, we're not really customers, but I like to see the shit show. At this point in our recovery process, every impacted customer should now be in contact with a designated recovery liaison. Since impacted customers are now working directly with their recovery liaisons, we're going to shift our regular updates to now take place on a weekly basis. So basically, what they have done is not completely fix the situation, but they have partnered each business with a recovery person, and they're working on an independent solution to make sure that they can get up and running. Because despite getting hit by ransomware, Kronos is still in the public sector, okay? They're still processing payrolls. They're still doing a pretty integral part of business. Just because you get attacked doesn't mean you get to sit out and say, time out. You're still in the public spotlight. You still got to make sure the wheel keeps turning, if you will. Now, I don't want to just sit here and tell you this entire thing. I want to actually guide you and show you the process of why something like this isn't necessarily as easy as restore from a backup, which is one of the criticisms that I've heard. So number one, we have to figure out how they ended up getting attacked. Now, Kronos has not actually said how they were attacked, but a lot of people have wondered maybe it's because of Log4j. Now, if you remember Log4j, literally from I would say like a month ago when we covered it, Log4j was a vulnerability that was in the Apache framework, a big portion of Java and a big portion of Apache. I kind of missaid in that last video, but what we did, we showed this one vulnerability that existed within a logging system. When you have a logging system for a server, the logging system is one of the mostly used pieces. It's the first line that people dig up and look at what's going on. If the logging system can be compromised, then it's just a bad situation all around. We used this exploit to run remote code, and what we had done was we used Log4j, the logging system, on a Minecraft server to launch remote code on an offended system. Okay, so basically we could run things like the calculator application. We could PowerShell ourselves into another person. We could run some really nefarious software. We could establish, we could do a lot of bad things through Log4j. Now, it's going to take a few weeks before everything's updated and set aside, and even then, trying to calculate how much it's been exploited already is scary. Now, Kronos was basically isolated in this case because a lot of Kronos' backend apparently did run on Java, but I think that's kind of a cop-out assessment because a lot of stuff is run on Java, so it probably could have been Log4j, it probably could have been a lot of things, but what had effectively happened was their cloud server was hit with ransomware. Now, every time we've looked at ransomware, something stupid like the Jigsaw ransomware, where you ran this virus and it showed you Billy the Puppet or whatever from the Jigsaw movies. And what they would do is they'd encrypt every single file on your drive. They would encrypt it, they'd set a key, they'd send the key to a command server somewhere, and then they would remove it from your system. Now, what the actual attackers would do is they would give you a Bitcoin address. So they'd be like, just give us $300 in Bitcoin, and we will give you the decoder phrase that you need to unencrypt all the files that we have encrypted on your computer. See, they're holding your files ransom, right? But all ransomware is not necessarily created equally. When ransomware hits, the scariest thing about ransomware is not just the encryption of data that it can do, but how much it can put itself and how much it can plant itself all over your network, all over your computer. So when people come out and say, why couldn't they just restore the backup? Okay, it's not as simple as opening a goddamn terminal, okay, and typing delete ransomware, okay? Like, you can't just do this, and you can't just do restore backup lamau, okay? That's not how it works. To understand, it's a way more complicated than that situation. First off, you have to make sure that the backups even exist, okay? A lot of places don't have the best backup, mindsets going around. They're not constantly backing things up. To give you an example, imagine if I had 10 computers in this room, right? Or actually, let's do an even more simpler scenario. I have 2 computers right now. I have this rig that I use to record videos, to play video games, and occasionally stream and edit my stuff. In the back over there, I don't know if you can exactly see it, I've got a Mac just sitting around. That's a separate computer I use to edit the videos. Now, each of these systems are connected to a backup solution that I have in my basement. It's a Linux server where basically I have it set so that every week, one time on Saturday, it just downloads all of my home directory from my system. And that means every single file that I have on my desktop, right? This is like every single file that I have stored on my computer locally. Now, what I do is I set it to back up things like my download folder, my games folder, okay, like save files, documents, John Cena, okay, this image of me with dumpy Among Us characters, okay? I've got all these files set to back up. Every week, this backs up and images itself downstairs. It runs a little virus check, and after all of that, it just saves it. It does it every week. I don't do it every day because there's an issue with that. Every day would mean that if I downloaded some potential malware and it was backed up alongside there before a virus check was ever done or anything, that backup itself could be compromised. In a lot of ransomware cases, not only will they encrypt your actual files, but if they try to detect for backup shares or file share somewhere, they're going to try to get that too. Because ransomware really isn't that big of an issue if you can just delete your drive and restore from a backup you had a week ago. If I get hit with ransomware, I'm probably going to format everything over here and restore from a backup. Same thing with the Macintosh. However, even then, it's not that easy. So in Kronos' case, with the ransomware they got hit with, which isn't disclosed, the actual process they have to go through is way more complicated. Because in their case, they have hundreds, if not thousands of servers storing tons of customer data on it. So if they have backups sitting around, re-imaging those backups is going to only happen when they can isolate what happened on their system. So if I got hit with ransomware, if I did, the first thing I would do is I would go into my router, log into it, check all the logs real carefully. I check what each system connected was doing. So I would check what sites they were pinging, what IPs they were going to, and let's just give an example. Let's say this computer wasn't the one that caused the issue. The Mac did. Now, this computer, I would look through its IP addresses and I would say, it contacted Steam, it contacted YouTube, it contacted Google, it contacted known IP addresses, known sites, known servers. And even that isn't completely comprehensive because they could have used a legitimate company's cloud service provider. They could have used their distribution network, their CDN server, to send me something malicious. So they could have used Discord CDN to send me something malicious, and that immediately wouldn't have tipped me off as a weird server. They could have used Google Cloud. They could have used whatever. So again, you have to look through verified IPs and addresses and even check them closer as well too. So it's just an entire headache to chase through. And you can imagine on a larger scale why this can cause so much time and grief and energy and money to even commit to. Now, if I suddenly connected to that and I found out, hey, it's connecting to some weird random server in the middle of nowhere, Russia, or Thailand, or somewhere in Mexico out of nowhere, all right, just some random server that didn't have any connection to some big service, and I was downloading files from there, then I'd look real closer. Then I'd identified that's the system that got compromised. So now I have to separate that from the network, I have to clean that entirely, and then not only do I clean that, then I check every other system on the network that it ever communicated to, so not just this computer, but potentially a tablet, a laptop, a cell phone, a car, something. And I would have to check if those things were compromised or if they could even be compromised. And once everything in that chain is cleaned, then I can go to the server and I can restore those backups. Because let's say that computer infected it, all right? And I didn't clean all the infections around and I did restore a backup. Not only am I putting that backup in risk by being infected, because of the backup process and being connected, but also I have caused a severe issue where once I've restored, I get attacked in hours, okay? It re-encrypts again. The malware has relaunched. So all that effort meant nothing. And so this is why it takes a lot of these services weeks, if not a month plus to make sure all of it is secured. Because they have to check every single node, and when your business is as large as Kronos, it tends to cause some issues, okay? It tends to be a long, expensive, and drawn-out process where you have a ton of engineers, you have a ton of professionals, and they're spending a ton of time to make sure everything is kosher before we go through. Now, to understand what this means for people who are actually affected, what really hurts the most, and what really is the most morally conflicting situation in this, is a lot of the targets in the situation end up being hospitals. Especially because of the pandemic now, hospital workers are overworked, right? Like if you work in the front lines, you're probably pulling more hours in the OT and in the overtime than you are like regular pay hours. And when those can't be calculated properly, you're not getting paid on time. It's that, is your paycheck even processing appropriately? Okay, like these are people who are working up the ass, and if their paychecks are getting hit, not only do they go through the stress of what they're dealing with at work, but then they got to go through the stress of, can we pay the bills on time? That's a big issue. And normally from the people that I've talked to affected by this, most companies, most places, most respectful places are just looking at their last paycheck and paying them the same amount, or looking at an average of the last 3 paychecks and calling it a day. Just because Kronos hits doesn't mean that you are legally allowed to delay paychecks. You should pay your paychecks on time, especially when the final paycheck of the year around the holidays is in question. That needs to hit hard. That's like the most important paycheck literally of the year. So as far as I know, most people are handling their paycheck stuff just fine. In fact, some places that I know are going back to literal pen and paper to make sure that they can even do their accounts right. Because it's not only paying out people that's the issue, it's also making sure your taxes are, appropriate on time. Next week, I got to be able to make sure that all of our payroll taxes and things are done in Canada at least, because that's a deadline. In fact, I'm probably going to have to make sure it gets done like tomorrow or the day after. But generally, when those taxes line up, you got to make sure that all of your data is there. All of your accounts are present. And in the world of taxes and paying people, no one's going to wait hours or days or weeks for one company to get their shit together. It's pretty sad that it happened. And honestly, this extra stress is just one thing we have to look at going forward into the world of cyber warfare in the future. Because this is the front line, okay? Now this is how you handle disruptions. These ransomware people have figured out that if you can attack like hospitals, which are more liable to hand out the payouts, to hand out the ransomware payouts to make sure that their, literal like framework doesn't fall apart on them, seems to be the more profitable solution. But yeah, that's generally what the Kronos malware attack was. And generally, it's something we have to look at going forward into 2022. This is the world we live in. It's the world of cyber warfare. And this is one cautionary tale. So before we tie this off, I just want you all to know that if you're ever going to touch the internet, or if you're ever going to use things on the internet, or you're going to use services, make sure you have your own backups, make sure that you're not downloading any shady things, and make sure that if the cloud service that you use falls contingent to this shit, you have another backup solution available. Because let me tell you, all right, the world can be a weird place when it comes to computers, all right? And you got to make sure you're safe in like every step going forward, and your stuff doesn't get hampered. That being said, though, hope you learned something. Hope you enjoyed the video. If you like what you saw, please like, comment, and subscribe. Dislike it if you dislike it. I am out.